Hello, I'm Fergus Mainland, and a couple of weeks ago I had the pleasure of catching up with Dr. Robert Treharne Jones in the library of Leander Club following his stroke that he had 11 months ago. It was wonderful to hear about his journey through his rehabilitation and his recovery after his stroke, but also to tap into some of the memories and some of the stories he's got with being part of the broadcasting and commentary team at Henley Royal Regatta over the years, as well as many other events around the world. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this conversation between myself and Robert Treharne Jones. Well, Robert, thank you very much for joining us on this sunny, very hot Tuesday morning. It's really quite nice. The weather's setting up very good for Henley Women's this coming weekend, and hopefully, touchwood, for the Royal in a couple of weeks as well. Thank you for joining us. And I suppose the first question for you is, how are you doing after what has been nearly 10 months, you said, of recovery after your stroke last year?
Yeah, so the full story, because it bears a bit of context. I knew that I'd had a leaky heart valve for some years, and my cardiologist said, just carry on with plenty of aerobic activity, and it'll be fine. So, lots of long distance walks, lots of rowing. I was walking 30 miles a week before my surgery because the valve got leakier, and eventually they decided that actually I did need a surgical replacement of the valve and an artificial valve put in its place. Now, a couple of years ago, I spent some months in the Royal Berkshire Hospital in Reading because I picked up a blood infection, and with that sort of infection, what it does is to seek out the weakest point in your circulation and cause even more problems. So in the case of my leaky heart valve, the infection sort of gathered around the valve and built up a whole sort of, well, if you look at it, it looks a bit like a fungus sticking on the valve. So it made it even less efficient than it was before. So by now the cardiothoracic surgeons were taking a keen interest in me, and surgery was recommended. So I went into Bart's Hospital in London, St Bartholomew's, which is my old medical school. And I had my operation on July the 19th last year. And when I was coming round from the general anaesthetic, they realised that I wasn't moving my left arm because I'd had a stroke while I was under the anaesthetic. A piece of the growth on my valve had flown off around my circulation and had lodged in one of the arteries in my brain and had cut off the blood supply to a major chunk of it. So I lost the use of my left arm and leg. And ever since then, it's been, I've spent the last 10 months in rehabilitation of various sorts in hospitals in London, in Reading, in Oxford. And it's been extremely challenging. They said right at the outset it was going to be hard work. And I said, well, I'm not afraid of hard work. I can do hard work. I don't think I realised it was quite going to be as hard work as it's proved to be. One of the issues, if I can summarise it sort of into a nutshell, nothing is easy. In the old days, I'd sort of do something spontaneous, like, right, I'd just pop over to that bookshelf and pull out a book and flick through it. Can't do that anymore. Or say to my wife, why don't we go out for a drink this evening, and jump into the car and go down to the pub. Can't do that anymore. Everything has to be sort of sussed through, gone through, planned. The resources that I need for that trip have to be carefully thought through and then implemented, hopefully. So I spend a lot of the time in a wheelchair, which is a manual wheelchair at the moment, but I'm getting a power chair very soon, which will make life a bit easier. So I think I'm going to be in the power chair come regatta. Stairs are interesting. I mean, I got up the few stairs outside here without any problem. But I'm hoping to commentate at Henley again, and that means going up to the top of the floater. And there are quite a few stairs there. So I'm going to have a practice run through to see how I get on.
So that's the challenge.
So that's the challenge, yes. If I can do that, I'll be happy.
you know, your voice is incredibly famous and so well recognised throughout the rowing world. And I think what's great is that is still, but you've been putting that to good use in the wards as well, haven't you? In terms of still being able to use it, and also lecturing and giving tutorials in the hospitals that you previously worked in.
Yes, I mean, I've been involved in postgraduate education throughout my medical career, so giving tutorials to the clinical staff seemed an obvious way forward, and it fulfilled some of my occupational therapy goals to do that. And it's gone off very well. I'm really glad that although the stroke was in the right-hand side of my brain, and obviously there are various important structures on that side, including the speech centre. So although I lost the use of my left arm and leg, thankfully my speech centre was spared. So my voice, I'm gratified to hear, sounds roughly the same as it always has done. And my singing voice sounds exactly the same, because I sing in a couple of choirs. So I sing in the parish, in the church choir at St Mary's. And I can't wait to get back.
Well, we're very much looking forward to hearing you back. And you mentioned that you're hoping to be commentating at the regatta again. Is that something for this year, or a goal that you're working towards for next year or in the future?
No, this year.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. That's very exciting. And what is it is that something that you, in terms of your recovery and your physio, that you've been working towards being in a position where you can work and commentate at this year's regatta?
It hasn't been a specific target at all, but in the back of my mind, or what's left of my mind, well, that's the other thing I've forgot to mention, it's quite important. As a result of the stroke, there was an inflammatory reaction in my brain, and the inflammation caused the pressure inside my skull to rise, and that in turn caused a further reduction in the blood flow to that part of the brain, which in turn caused more inflammation, which in turn caused the pressure to rise even further, and it rose to dangerous levels. So that I had to have neurosurgery where they removed a whole chunk of my skull. So I've got a piece of bone the size of my hand now missing from the top of my skull, and at some stage they're going to have to put that back. But that's not going to happen until approaching Christmas time, I suspect.
And, over the years that you've been involved with the regatta, what have been for you, some of the standout highlights? Actually, I suppose before we get to that, how did you first get involved with Henley Regatta itself?
Yes, I was first invited to join the race reporters team 45 years ago, I think, 1980. And the race reporters are the guys on the back of the umpire's launch who radio the details through to the guy who's sitting up on top of the floater and who scribble it down, and that is used as the basis for the script, for the sort of formulaic commentary that you get at Henley. So, heat of the Princess Elizabeth Challenge Cup is in progress between Eton College on the Berkshire station and Radley on the Buck station. At the end of the island, Eton striking 36, lead Radley striking 34 by 2/3 of a length.
Still got it.
Bang. Well, it's just as well because we've got a few new voices on the floater this year, and I've been asked to mentor them. I do that on a regular basis, particularly with the difficult overseas crews. When we get the Polish coming over, and the fun starts.
Yeah, and that's probably quite a good follow-up question then. Particularly the international crews or the Polish crews, as you mentioned. How do you go about researching it? So when it comes out over the tannoy, I think you're very good at it, and Jim Harlow is another one who's particularly good at absolutely nailing some of the pronunciations.
Well, it's practice. Invariably, if I have a new country, like we had a Norwegian crew once, so I have a friend of mine who's Norwegian, And I went off with her and I said, right, I want to get this right. Now, with some languages, it's not possible to get it right. I mean, I've commentated in Poland at Poznan many times. And I remember there was one particular surname of one athlete with more than the usual number of Zs in it. And I said, now I'm going to get this right. So does it sound like this? And I said the name. He said, no, not quite. It should be. I said, right. Blah, blah, blah. He said, yes, that's okay. I said, I don't want to be okay. I want it to be correct. He said, Robert, you're English. It'll never be correct because unless you're Polish, you won't be able to speak this way. Which I thought was interesting. Brzezinski.
Just like that. Yeah. And you know the broadcasting and the coverage of Henley has evolved enormously over the years, and I suppose there's the floating grandstand part of it, you know, the voice of God as some people refer to it, but there's also been Regatta Radio over the years. There's now the live stream, which is the 10-year anniversary of that. I mean, I know you've been involved with Regatta Radio. You must have some fantastic stories from those days.
No, with Regatta Radio, we simply we didn't have any high-tech technology. We were doing the whole thing off a series of mobile phones, and not very good mobile phones. So we had one guy at the barrier, and one guy at Fawley, and one guy at Remenham, and then one guy on the finish line, and just about strung it together. But we had no talk back, so we couldn't hear what was going on in the studio. The studio was a porter cabin out in the competitor's car park. Where we put the guys at each of the intermediate stages was challenging. So we had a sort of a scaffolding tower inside the hedge at Remenham Club, which sort of swayed around gently in the breeze. It was not the most stable structure we'd ever invented. And then we borrowed a tennis umpire's chair to stick at the barrier. And it got a bit exciting on the evening shift on the Saturday, because whoever was on shift at that time was up this chair with his microphone and his notes. And he was being accosted by a series of people who were passing by, who'd spent most of the afternoon in the bar and were seriously over-refreshed, and weren't beyond lobbing a few missiles in his direction as well. So when it came to allocating the duties, I had to be fairly savvy about who I was going to put up there.
They had to be switched on and could handle themselves up an umpire chair.
Exactly, yeah.
And it's, you know, when you speak to other people who have been involved with Regatta Radio and with the coverage of the regatta, it sounds like, you know, as you mentioned, it's been quite the operation, but it sounds like it's done an incredible service for the sport to help elevate and take it out into the public as well.
Well, that's the thing about commentary. It should elevate the sport if it's done properly. And this is something that World Rowing recognised a good few years ago now, and that's how I got involved at that level. Because World Rowing took the view that if they needed good commentary, they had to put people in place to provide that. Because prior to, I think, 2003 it started like that. Prior to that, it was entirely hit and miss whether they got any commentators at all. So sometimes they'd be sort of local people who knew a bit about the sport and who were willing to sit in front of a microphone, usually in the finish tower. So sometimes the local organising committee provided it, people. But World Rowing recognised that the commentary needed to be in English plus the local language. So they hit upon a scheme where they decided to fund it exactly like that. So at every event, there were race commentators and there were tower announcers, and we were all bilingual, so we could speak in the local language and English. And that seemed to go pretty well, and that's the way it's been ever since, which is why typically at a World Rowing event, the race commentary jumps backwards and forwards between the local language and English. And then the fun starts when the local language is English. Because otherwise it's terribly hit and miss, because generally speaking, you've only got about 250 metres worth of commentary to do before you're passing back to the other guy. So you don't have time to tell a story, whereas when we were in Carapiro in 2010 for the World Championships, and everything was in English, and we could start at the start, obviously, and just tell a story in English from beginning to end. And that's the great thing well, it's stopped now. We used to be in launches alongside the races, and then that was cut down because they were worried about the wash they created. So if we do follow races, it's in a car on the roadside. But yes, I maintain, you see, that rowing commentary, doing it that way, is the easiest job in the world, because you get driven up and down the course in air-conditioned comfort with a microphone in your hand. All you have to do is stick your head out the window and talk about the race in front of you.
Yeah.
And you're not beholden to the TV director. You can pick the section of the race that you want to talk about.
Yeah.
Because different races have different content, and there's different things happening at different stages of the race. And actually, if you keep a fairly wide-angle view, you can see stuff happening which the TV director may not notice. And that happened in the boat race on one occasion, that I spotted a guy who was completely rowed out, and he was just putting his blade in the water, no effort at all. This was by the bandstand.
He's got a long way to go.
Got a long way to go, yeah. And I was doing Radio 5 at the time, and I mentioned this, and it was only about, when I listened to the playback, it was only a minute and a half later that TV picked up on the fact that this guy was in need of serious attention.
Uh-huh. And obviously there's different responsibilities, for the crowd and the engagement from the floater at Henley to a final, or at the World Championships or the Olympics. How do those two experiences compare to you, or stack up in terms of your commentaries that you've done over the years?
Well, you've done my training course, so you know what it's about. And the way I teach people is, what I do myself is escalate the delivery through the duration of a race. And then I escalate the delivery through a regatta. So obviously on finals day at an Olympics, you're giving it both barrels from the gun.
Yeah.
Whereas in the first heat of the first day, it's a fairly gentle delivery, but obviously you want to tell people what's happening and the way it's happening. But there was an occasion at the World Championships in Canada many years ago when there was a woman commentator, happened to be, who is sadly no longer with us, and she was giving it full welly from the first stroke of the first heat, and it was actually quite difficult to listen to. And people started complaining, so they pulled her off the rotor at lunchtime, just so that people could calm down again.
And when you're watching on at Henley, is there a particular race or a particular event that you look forward to each year?
Not particularly, because of course by the time you get to finals day, I mean, to reach a Henley final is a triumph in itself. A lot of people don't realise that. They think that the only prize is to come away with a little red box. But that's a bit like saying, well, the only Olympic medal worth having is a gold medal. And somebody to have any medal is a major plus. So.
And in recent years, there's been a couple of times in the floater that, particularly when it was an all Thames final in the Thames, or it was an all Windsor final, things went a little bit off script, to say. Were you involved with that, or have you been involved in any such occasions?
I remember an occasion when it was Thames against Thames in the final of the Thames, and my good friend Andy Taylor, who was a Thames man himself, was doing the commentary, and he decided to go entirely off script and ad-lib the whole thing in a very non-Henley way. Unfortunately, we didn't have a recording of this delivery because it was very amusing and very varied, and people didn't, top of the float, didn't expect that at all. But it's interesting you mentioned the audience on top of the floater, because that's where you're only allowed up there, well, either if you're a member of the commentary team or you're a member of the enclosure of stewards. You can't get there with a guest badge, and it's a really good congregating area. It's where I meet all my friends during regatta, because they're rowing enthusiasts up there, and they are the fiercest critics of anything that the commentator says or does. So if anybody makes a slip,
Do you get heckled?
yeah, on occasions. Or it's they who start the round of applause if we've just had a difficult crew name.
So when you're back in the floater this year, are you hoping to get eased in with something nice and straightforward, as you said, Eton against Radley and the Princess Elizabeth, or are you hoping for we've got a German or a Dutch 8 in the Thames going up against their Polish counterparts, or are you hoping for something nice and easy?
If I'm mentoring the newcomers, then teaching them the pronunciation, particularly if they don't speak those languages, could be quite challenging. So particularly there was this difficult Polish crew a few years ago, and one of my colleagues was having difficulty with it. So I said, come on, let me buy you a coffee or something and we'll run through it. So I went off and gave him a private tutorial on how to pronounce it. And not just the pronunciation, but the delivery, the cadence of the delivery. Because too many people, if they don't speak a language, they think if they take a run at it, then, I don't know, things will fall into place, and it doesn't work like that. Things go seriously out of place if you try it like that. So, cutting it down one syllable by another, and then learning how to pronounce each syllable is the way I tend to do things. And with athlete names, there's not a lot of opportunity at Henley to mention individual athletes unless it's a small boat. But if I look at the name and think, ooh, how do I pronounce that? I go off and find the crew. And I ask them. If the athlete doesn't know how to pronounce their name, then we're in serious doo-doo, aren't we?
And just finally, from all of your experiences and involvement with the regatta, what does Henley mean to you?
Well, it's the pinnacle of the rowing season, isn't it? I used to be the regatta press officer for 15 years, and I used to explain to newcomers from the press how unique it was, because on the one hand, it's a major reunion of rowers past and present. It's the one occasion of the year where I can expect to see all my rowing friends in one place. It provides top-class racing from every stage, from juniors, students, schools, clubs, right up to open international crews who may have featured at the recent World Championships or Olympics. I was going to say something important then. It's completely gone. Sorry, I'm blaming my brain injury for that. But I know that some people poo-poo it because there are, there is a small section of the crowd who has little or no interest in the actual rowing, and they're only there to have a good time and socialise. But without that section there, without those people enjoying themselves and having a great time, Henley wouldn't be the same. So all the constituent parts of the regatta all have a part to play in creating this facade of an Edwardian garden party.
Well, Robert, thank you very much for your time today, and we're wishing you all the very best on your continued recovery, and looking forward to hearing your wonderful tones around the stewards' enclosure once more this year.
Thanks very much, Fergus.